Good afternoon. My name is Joel Kincart, and I am the Associate Vice President for Development and the Campaign Director at RPI. I am thrilled to be among so many RPI alumni, parents, and students and community members. Welcome to our campus and to our largest reunion and homecoming ever. I know. It's like it's a special birthday or something. There are so many fantastic events that await you, and I hope your experience this weekend reconnects you to your time here on campus as we celebrate 200 years of history. RPI is filled with so many meaningful traditions, and today I'm thrilled to be introducing not only one of our esteemed RPI leaders, but also an RPI alumnus with an incredible legacy story. Our traditions presentation today is conducted by John Kolb, who serves as the Vice President for Information Services and Technology and Chief Information Officer at RPI. John received his bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering from Rensselaer. A licensed professional engineer in the New York State, John's Rensselaer career spans over 40 years. He previously served as Dean of Computing and Information Services, Assistant Dean of Engineering, Head of Core Engineering, Director of Engineering Computing Services, and Manager in the Center for Interactive Computer Graphics. John has taught courses in engineering science, management, and information technology. He is also a member of the American Society of Engineering Education and the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. He is the past recipient of the Boeing Outstanding Engineering Educator Award. John conceived and implemented an innovative mobile computer program for all undergraduate students at RPI, and most recently, successfully completed the installation of the first IBM Quantum System 1 on a college campus right here at RPI. John's esteemed family legacy at RPI includes his father, mother, sister, daughter, and son, all have attended the university throughout their educational careers. Today's traditions presentation delves into the rich tapestry of RPI's history and cherished traditions. So without further ado, it is my great privilege and pleasure to introduce the man, the myth, the legend that is John Kolb, class of 1979. Please help bring him out.
Well, is this working? Can everybody hear me? After an introduction like that, I'm not sure I really want to come on stage. So, but thank you very much, Joel. And by the way, just a couple of tidbits. When he says this is the largest class, I assume he's meaning the number of attendees, rather than we're all getting a little older and no, we'll stop there. And I thought you might be interested in one factoid before I start. On the mobile computing program, this is our 25th year, if you can believe it, of the mobile computing program. And we counted up how many laptops we've given out to incoming students. And I was thinking about this, Roger, when you were talking the other night about Neil Barton. In the 25 years, we've given out 30,187 laptops to incoming students. So it's very cool. So let me get started and jump right in here, and this is a little bit of history, a little bit of traditions, and as I've told some of you, this is typically a 90-minute talk that I've crammed into 30 minutes, so if I keep going fast like this, you'll know why I'm doing it. So the first thing I want to acknowledge is two people that work very closely with me that are up here in the front row, Jen Monger, who's the manager of our archives, and Jen Littlejohn, who's the manager of John Kolb, and they've helped me quite a bit, and between them is the director of our libraries, Andrew White. So thank you, the three of you. And being RPI, there has to be a test at the end of this. So I want to acknowledge, if you all would stand up, our young alums here have put together a program for this evening. Come on, all of you, stand up. they have put together a wonderful program after the drone show tonight to have a trivia contest. I will give a few hints here today. My class has already tried to bribe me like crazy to get all the questions, and I've been holding back on that. But Joe and I'm still going to hold back on that. But if somebody wants to renovate a green roof campus building, I can probably be bribed. So first slide that's kind of neat, and Jen Monger put this together, is 100 years ago, what did things look like? And by the way, we'll make these slides available on one of the websites for the whole reunion if you want to take a look at it. But these are great pictures of the ceremony that they had, the trolley cars that were downtown. I think that's on River Street. And they were gone. Roger, hopefully they were gone by the time you got here, but they were definitely gone by the time I got here. So, but there's some of those slides like that I think are really great. So let me start from the beginning real quick. Stephen Van Rensselaer and Amos Eaton, 1824. Stephen Van Rensselaer, there's been several studies on this. Well, first of all, the letter, and one of the mission statements that I've always liked is what's in red there: for the purpose of instructing persons in the application of science to the common purposes of life. I've been on a zillion committees around here to rethink what our motto is, what our mantra is, everything else. Those words still ring today, and they're true. Application of science to the common purposes of life. And that goes across our whole institute 200 years ago, today. So who is Stephen Van Rensselaer? Very interesting guy. There's been a number of studies where people have looked at wealth over a number of years and adjusted for inflation, and he still comes up typically in the top 10, if not top 20, wealthiest Americans of all time. And most of it was in land. He owned most of Rensselaer County, most of Albany County, and it was a patroon system in terms of his wealth. But this was a guy who was very active in the militia, in Congress. He was the second lieutenant governor of New York State. Those are the things we typically don't know about Stephen Van Rensselaer. And he started the school with that letter of the common purposes of life. And he found a guy by the name of Amos Eaton. And by the way, I will put some trivia in here, which is not on the test, but Amos Eaton was in jail long before he found him and had him be the first senior faculty member here. And he was really a polymath type person: geology, botany, all sorts of different sciences, and he was just curious about all of them and wanted his students to be curious about all of them. Mentioned him yesterday about being a geologist. He was that too, and some of the early graduates here were geology majors. But one of the things that Eaton did, which I thought was really clever, and Jen actually has a copy of this in the archives, is this little book on the bottom here. He would take people on field trips up and down the Hudson, out the Erie Canal, and so on, and collect samples and have them put them in their lab book, identify them, and hold on to those lab books. It was always, the Amos Eaton change in education was education by doing, education by teaching, education by activity. It was not education by just reading a book and listening to lectures. It was absolutely getting out there and getting your hands dirty on these things. He got involved with a number of people in this area, a couple notables. One was Emma Willard of the Emma Willard School, and they have a number of notes that they traded back and forth about education and education going forward. By the way, Amos Eaton actually believed that women's education was incredibly important. Had some women here in the 1800s that did not get approved by the board, and so we didn't have the first two women to come here fully matriculated until the summer of 1942. And as Joel said, one of those happened to be my mom. So that was kind of neat. So a trivia question that I don't think is on the test, so just don't worry about that. But we all walk past a sign every day to Ebenezer Emmons, who was a very prominent geologist, came up with some of the original drawings for the rock formations in New York State. There's the Emmons line that runs through our campus. It's an earthquake line, very faint, but it was very, very well known in geology circles, and there's some famous fights between some of the geologists here, between Emmons and James Hall and some others. But anybody know where the plaque is for Emmons? by the Sage Dining Hall. So for those of you, if you're going up past the Low Center on your right, the Sage Dining Hall on your left, there's a little outcropping there with a little seat. If you go in there and look, that's Emmons or Evans. And by the way, what I usually tell the parents when I give this talk is ask your student if they have any clue where that is. And their kids go past it every day, and they don't know where that is, which is great. Another really prominent alum is Garnet Baltimore, first African-American graduate from Rensselaer, very prominent architect for parks, including Prospect Park. So some of these pictures, I'm sorry they're not a little bit better, but the early pictures of Prospect Park are just stunning how amazing that place is, or was, compared to the way it is today. And you know, it was the place where you got dressed up in your Sunday finest and you'd walk up the promenades and look over the, out onto the Hudson and so on. The street out here on 8th Street, from Sage to Congress, is actually called Garnet D. Baltimore Way in his honor. All right, so let's move on to presidents. So Blatchford was the first president, was a minister. And by the way, I'm going to skip around a little bit on my own prerogative here on 1, 3, 4 with a star, 5, 9, 11, 14, 18, and 19, just if you're wondering and you're counting. But the first one was, of course, Blatchford. Number 3, this is the one I usually don't want to mention, but I think it's important that we all suck it up a little bit on this. Anybody know who this is? This is, his last name is Knott, N-O-T-T. He was actually the president of Union College and the president of RPI at the same time. Not something any of us want to admit in this room. So we'll move on right after him. The asterisk here, number 4, is Benjamin Green, B.F. Green, who really is the person that got us going in the Polytechnic and engineering and so on. He studied in Europe, particularly in Paris with the École de Polytech. But he wasn't president, and I have to tell you, I've been making the mistake for a long time of having him up here as president. There's a little asterisk down here now that he was actually the head of the chief academic person, our Rebecca Dorge of the day, and Beeman was here as president, but he was actually working on getting a law degree while he was being president. B.F. Green was pretty amazing. John Winslow, I think people know, brought the Bessemer process from England to the US. Our 5th president, he was the one that signed an agreement with Abraham Lincoln to go off and form the ironclad ship, the USS Monitor. They made those panels here, shipped them down the river to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, assembled that, and then it went off and fought the Merrimack. Ricketts probably doesn't need an awful lot of introduction, but Ricketts was the president of the first 3 decades of the 20th century. Right after there was a large fire in Troy in 1904, that's when we started moving up the hill, and I'll talk more about that, to putting the Green Roof campus in place, and sometimes referred to as the Ricketts campus. Houston is here because he's the one who really expanded the campus and put us more into the graduate, started working on the graduate programs, including the graduate programs at Hartford, expanded the physical plant, put a number of buildings in place, and we'll talk about him. I don't think this group needs much introduction to George Lowe, and I always thought when your calling card was, yeah, I just put a person on the moon, you probably don't have to add much more to your resume after that. So Shirley Ann Jackson, 23 years of being president here. After Ricketts, the longest serving president of Rensselaer, and of course, Marty Schmidt, who you'll hear from pretty soon here. I also had a slide in here, and I always put this in on Willie Stanton. And I love putting this slide up because now this group gets it, but a lot of folks, I ask them, well, who was Willie Stanton? Well, was he a president? No. Was he a provost? No. He must have been some hotshot faculty member. No, blah, blah, blah. And I just love hearing all the things but he's probably one of the more amazing people I met when I was a student here. And Willie Stanton, as probably a good part of this audience knows, was a dishwasher. And I had the good fortune that he was still a dishwasher when I was here as a student. And here's a guy collecting your dirty dishes, and he's giving you a lecture on go out, stand up tall, go out there and go get them type of thing to everybody that went by him in a day. He's one of a few people that is a non-athlete in the Athletes Hall of Fame. He opened his home to a number of athletes, particularly men's ice hockey players and other things. Just a great person. And one of the reasons I show this slide to a lot of folks, including new staff members, is to get across all of us can make a difference here, and Willie made a huge difference to me and others. So our students, and once again, I apologize, I'm ripping through some of this stuff, but our current GM and PU, Vivian and Kat, talk a little bit about that. And by the way, I have to do a call out to Roger Mike, who's up here in the front row. I stole some of his material that he went back and looked at some of the original work on the Grand Marshal, and it's really spot on with everything that we looked at, which great to have you here, Roger. One of the things that Roger put together was the Grand Marshal, Albert Harper, was a Civil War veteran. He was off campus, he was coming back. There was the president of the class. The president of the class was a little bit worried that Harper would come back, become the president of the class, he was gonna be out of job, and all of a sudden, Harper's off and running. And so they created the Grand Marshal position as sort of a figurehead with nothing really associated with it. And when Harper came back, they had him be the Grand Marshal. Then all of a sudden, the Grand Marshal became the chief student leader and so on. So it was a very interesting little political maneuvering early on at RPI in the student ranks. Jen and one of her colleagues, Tammy Gobert, found this on eBay one day. This is actually the pin that the Grand Marshal used to actually wear. This is from is it up there? It's like the late 1800s, 1876 or something like that. And what a great find. And please don't outbid Jen on eBay when you find things like this, because it's really great to keep them in our archives. This is against our sign policy of today, but this is the way candidates used to do some of their campaigning around campus. The debates that were had in the Hassan Quad, with the Lally building on one side, the Russell Sage laboratory on the other side. And essentially what people would do, this is about 64, 65 timeframe. They would essentially list out all their resume in terms of their student activities on the billboards. And this is one of my favorite parts. They'd go get a kid from Troy to go carry a sign around as to who to vote for and so on. So I mentioned Harper already. The first president of the union was Slagle. And the first two women, anybody want to take a quick guess on that? This crowd should know this. It wasn't Mary Bailey. It wasn't Mary Bailey. It was Mary Garrity. Thank you. It was. I wish we had prizes for you now, but you're going to have to wait till later to go get those. But it was very interesting that the first woman Grand Marshal, the first woman president of the union, were both in the same year, and it was Mary Garrity and Laura Tansky. All right, so let's move on to buildings, and I'm trying to move along here, so I apologize once again for the speed. But the first building we had was the old Bank Place, and this was down on River Street, sort of kitty corner to where the Ale House is. Now, this crowd knows where the Ale House is. When I say that to the current students, they're like, what are you talking about? Where is that? Anyway, you know where the Ale House is, that's where the old Bank Place is. A couple trivia questions here on this slide, which I really like. The building in the middle on the top, anybody want to take a guess at what that is? It's the main building. Does everybody understand what the main building was? So this building right up here on the top, and I don't have a pointer here, but on the top in the middle, it was to the south of the approach. And that was the main academic building for RPI up until the 1904 fire. When that burned down, we started moving up the hill to the green roof campus. And the building to the upper right is part of the Winslow building. It was made in two pieces. That was to the north of, and still stands today, to the north of the approach. The old Bank Place we talked about, but the two buildings on either side in the middle. Anybody want to take a guess what they are? Which one?
They're both.
And who are they named after? Okay. Yeah, you got maybe an 85 on that. Okay, so they are both Russell Sage. One of them's Russell Sage Laboratory. One of them's Russell Sage Dining Hall. However, this is a trick question. So Russell Sage was an industrialist. The story really is true that he wasn't really fond of education, and he particularly wasn't fond of education for women. Part of the problem for Russell Sage is he died before his widow did. And and she's in our Hall of Fame. She was a great philanthropist to RPI and named one building to the right up there, the Russell Sage Laboratories, after her dearly departed husband, and named the building over here to the left after her nephew, who both happen to be Russell Sage. So sorry, only partial credit on that one. So, and then some other buildings that you can see there. Anybody know about this building? So part of the hint is it says gymnasium, okay? But this was at the bottom of the approach to the south. So all the way at the bottom to the south was the first gymnasium for for RPI. You had the main building just above it on the hill, and you had Winslow above it on the other side of the approach. This building was there for a while. There's actually a plaque there, this is another one of those plaques that everybody goes by and never sees. And I should have asked the trick question first of when was the 87 gym built? Because people, right, exactly, thank you. It's always funny when I put this up halfway through a presentation, then ask later, and everybody says 1887. But okay, we dedicated the gym in 1912, moved out of this building. It became the Playhouse before we had the USO Hall moved here, which is now the Playhouse for RPI on 15th Street. And our first play was in the Playhouse with RPI players. They started in the 1920s, but this was, I think, about a 1950s or so play in the Playhouse. Ideas on what this building is? Yeah, see, this is no fun with this group. You're way too smart on all these things. So, but what's fun about this one is the history of this is it was a warehouse of sorts. Anybody want to say more specifically? Blimp is what I heard. Yeah, there's a blimp hangar. Rhode Island. Okay, so during Houston's time, they actually disassembled this and reassembled it from Rhode Island to where it sits today as our home for ice hockey. And you can see all the piping that went underneath it for ice, which, by the way, this is all a problem now. So the provost is saying, big problem, big problem. This is rusted away, so we're actually not using this cooling system right now. We have something called an ice mat that's on top of the concrete that we're using for the next couple of years until we can replace that whole system, because the system under the floor, which was put there in the 1950s, surprise, surprise, is leaking. Very interesting building as it went together. I love this picture of, so some people in this audience will remember when we used the field house for things beyond ice hockey, and before the large arena was built in Albany, that's had many names, this was the largest venue in this area for pro boxing, for rock concerts, for everything else, and it's no longer the case. And I also, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I always ask people about the hockey line. Why were we in the hockey line? And they say, well, school spirit and so on. I was like, yeah, but what we really wanted to do was get seats that didn't have a column in front of us so we could actually see what was going on in front of the ice. So that's after we took the columns out. One of the reasons I like this particular slide is the freshman halls that are up, Nason, Warren, all those that I think all of you are aware of, were named after RPI faculty members. Very interesting. We have not done that in a lot of other places. And I always thought when I saw Hall, it's like we ran out of names and we had to come up with a Hall. But it's named after James Hall, the geologist. And you can see the other people up here in terms of who they were and so on. Once again, some pictures. I always love the old cars in these pictures. This is of the campus, and that picture in the upper left, we're looking west from the quadrangle, if you will, across the 86 field. And it's the old Warren Estate house that became a residence hall, right, Jen? It was the clubhouse, thank you, excuse me. The residence hall, I'll show you in a second, thank you. And you can see a couple of maps here. Once again, I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but the map in 1925, remember there was a fire in 1904, moved up the hill 20 years later. The map on the upper left shows the beginning of what becomes the Green Roof campus. The campus dormitory that's right there in the middle of the picture was the residence hall that was left over from the Warren Estate. And what Jen just said is the student clubhouse was the one that was right on the west edge of the 86 field. And then on the other side, you can see how the rest of the buildings started to get put in place, including the last one was the Ricketts building in about 1931, 32, something like that. And then of course, the clubhouse moved to the current Rensselaer Union in 1967 and some other buildings that we've worked on. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the quantum computer, but I'd be glad to talk more about that after this. One trivia question for you is, can anybody name the 4 Catholic saints that are overlooking the quantum system? Oh, come on. And I'll go through those later, but it's really interesting, some of the connections here, like St. Ambrose, that's in the middle there, was the Cardinal of Milan, Italy. It turns out that wonderful glass on the front and sides of the quantum computer, it was actually made by Gopian glass in Milan, Italy. So there's some really interesting connections in that space. All right, a little bit of traditions, and I'm not going to go through a lot of things, but one of the questions that I'm asked quite often is, how come, in the middle of that seal thing there, it goes from 5 to 3 to 5. What's going on with that? And it's so funny how many people have asked this question, and it's major ticks versus minor ticks, so that's really 5.3, and you're seeing the minor ticks there, and of a pole that somebody who's doing land surveying would use. I'll let you read this one because I think it's great in terms of, this is for the 1959 transit. It probably could have been written today in some respects in terms of, in our generation, the atomic age, blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty interesting. And of course, this was the years of the lacrosse team and other things. The Rensselaer Medal, we still get a number of our students who get the Rensselaer Medal from their high schools, the highest math and science in a high school. We actually have a convocation in here where we recognize all the people who get the Rensselaer Medal, all the freshmen, as well as the other awards that students are getting while they're in progress. And it's pretty amazing when you think about how many alums have won the Rensselaer Medal, and it still is a great motivation to come to a place like RPI and pursue your passion for math and science. I'll let the pictures speak for themselves, but I'll talk about 2 real quick. Second from the top on the left up there is, of course, our president, but also Christy Bowers, who is our new athletic director. If you haven't met Christy, you should, because she's just a delightful hire for us, and she was the associate athletic director at BU, so she understands ice hockey, among other things, and she's a terrific person to get to know. You can see the push ball one all the way up in the upper right, but I like the one because I was on the line that George Lowe is actually handing out donuts on right now, so it's always nice when the president comes by with donuts. So I had this one in here because, and is Rick Hart in the audience somewhere? Okay, Rick, thank you. Well, first of all, if you look way over to the right up there, that's really what Rick looked like about 1,000 years ago. But this is a great slide that shows our students taking the lead to do something. Our students were interested in student leadership. They funded it out of the budgets of the union for a couple years, and then helped to form the Archer Center for Student Leadership. And there's the PU and GM there, VP of Student Life, our president, Roland Schmidt at the time, and Linda Tettelbaum-McCluskey, who was the first leader of that group. And I think it's just symbolic of our students leading the way to doing the next thing. Phalanx, every year, a number of you are familiar with this, but we recognize, the students recognize themselves. They choose the next group of leaders that they want to recognize. It's not driven by the administration, not driven by the faculty, it's driven by the students. And this was the class that was there last spring. The other tradition that we have is next to the Naval Academy, we have the most flag officers ever, the most admirals and so on in the Navy, other than Annapolis. It's a pretty interesting achievement. You're going to hear a little bit more about Zabs Latiper in a second as we talk about the Hall of Fame. But there's some active people like Briar Joyner, Brown, and Van Poots that are still very active naval admirals. And it's just a great thing. I think the number is up to about mid-70s, around 80, something like that. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing. Fraternities and sororities, something that's a little bit different today than it was maybe 50 years ago is a lot less people in fraternities and sororities, but just as passionate people that are in fraternities and sororities. I do have to credit Roger for helping put this slide, making sure I put this slide in my deck, including people like Ricketts and so on, and keep going down that list all the way down. We recognize Neil Barton yesterday in terms of his contributions, but he was a brother in Delta Phi, and a very rich history there. And then the welcome, we have a welcome still every year. Our students have a handshake with the president, go up to the ECAB facility and form typically their class year. This was a year ago in 23, and get involved with other things. On Monday, if any of you hang around, we have is it called Space Day that we're doing here. And Reed Weissman is in the bottom right there, who is our commencement speaker this past May. And he's the commander of the Artemis II mission that will go up next year around the moon. This was him when he was at the space station and joined us for, I don't know, somebody in this room may know, but it was about 8 years ago. He joined us for one of our alumni events from the space station to this room. What? 10 years ago, thank you. Yeah, I knew this group was going to be precise. All right. And you can see other things that we do. One thing that's a relatively new tradition, but you can see with Marty and Lynn over here on the lower left, the ROTC actually does an event on September 11th to remember all the souls that were lost. They actually run up and down the approach. I get tired just watching them do this, but they run up and down the approach for every flight of stairs in the World Trade Center. It's pretty impressive to watch. Certainly commencement, that's a commencement from like the, I'm getting the cut. My boss just came in, so I'm really getting the cut off now. Well, you got here just in time. There's my boss giving out degrees. By the way, I have to show this picture because we talked about the first two women graduates. There's Mary Ellen Rathman Kolb and Lois Graham, actually getting their degrees from Houston, President Houston over there. And so a couple just quick concluding slides. Next up is we're going to talk about the Hall of Fame, 4 people that are going to be talked about quite a bit. I always like to put up a couple pictures of people from the Hall of Fame, including one of the people from the class of '79, who's not with us anymore is Mary Ruth Bond-Mayer, who had just a very successful career as a test pilot and administrator in NASA. And with that, that's the website for the archives if you would like any more information, and I think that's it. Anybody have a question after all that? Want to fact check anything that I said? Yes, go ahead. So the question is, how did RPI get started? You heard that it wasn't an undergraduate school. It was considered sort of graduate studies, but not in the way we think of graduate studies today. So it was still sort of right after high school, but it was considered sort of beyond some of the liberal arts education and some of that. So whether it was true graduate education or it was undergraduate education is somewhat debatable because it was a different time, if you will. Is another question? Yes, go ahead. So the question is about the test pilot. Did she die of natural causes or something else? Unfortunately, she died of a plane crash. That's why you don't fly. Yeah, okay. And with that, I will get off the stage and go ahead, Roger and Terry.
Thank you so much, John.